Dawn bled slow and thin over the red mountains, a pale wash that caught upon stone as if the peaks themselves had been rubbed with chalk. The tower cast a long shadow, narrow as a lance. Wind came down from the passes cold and dry, tugging at the torn banners that clung to the broken crenels like dead ivy, and carried with it the sense of sand, old blood, and crushed blue petals. Eddard Stark knelt in that wind, hands crimson to the wrists, the sword across his knees. The blade was nicked and notched. It had kissed good men and taken them from their mothers, their wives, their sisters. The ground around him was a ring of stillness no wind could touch. Ser Oswell whence black bat helm lay on its side by his boot, its polished cheek dented in. Ser Gerald Hightower sprawled face down among the stones, his white cloak streaked brown where it had been dragged. And Ser Arthur Dane, the sword of the morning, lay awake and breathing. Howland Reed worried a strip of linen between stained fingers and said nothing as he leaned over Dane. The Dornishman's breath rattled, a wet sound that did not belong in a throat made for oath and laughter. Dawn, that pale blade, lay a few paces from his hand where Ned had put it, point buried in the sand like a marker over a fresh grave. "Do it," Dane whispered. He had the sort of voice that made men believe it could not break. "Do it, Lord Stark." Ned's hand tightened on his own sword and then loosened. He could still feel the last parry, the sudden give when Howland's reed spear found flesh from behind, the cold shock of betrayal that had flashed in Dane's violet eyes. He had told himself a dozen times in the space of a heartbeat that it was war and there were no songs in it worth the breath they cost. But still, the spear had gone in, and a great night had fallen. "No," Ned said. "I am sick of killing." Dane laughed at that and coughed blood. Howland's hands moved with the careful slowness of a man binding a venomous snake. The bandage stuck to bright arterial and dark venous stains, and the little Cranagman set his jaw and wrapped tighter. The wind shifted, scenting sweet, and Ned rose so fast his knees creaked. Blue roses, their frail petals trampled in a scatter over the threshold stones, their scent as sharp as memory. The door was splintered, but on the inside the castle felt smaller, as if silence had taken up more room. He followed the fragrance down a narrow stair. Lyanna lay upon a prickly bed of rushes, a cool cloth over her brow. Her hair had been braided at some earlier hour, but the braid had come loose, dark strands plastered to a face gone too pale. Winter lived in her eyes yet, the gray as clean and bright as the weirwood pool in spring thaw. Beside her, a bundle in a midwife's arms gave a soft, tired cry, a sound that brushed against Ned's chest and unstrung him. "You came," Lyanna said, her voice little more than breath. "I would have crossed all Dorne on my knees," he replied. His glove creaked when he touched her cheek. "Are you? Not dead?" Her mouth twitched. "Not yet. I decided to disappoint you." He huffed something like a laugh. "You never have." She shifted. The cloth fell away. He saw the fever's sheen and the shiver beneath. The midwife, Willa, he would learn later, inclined her head, her dark hair escaping its scarf. The child gnawed at nothing, then slept again, as if the effort of living had been enough for one small hour. "Robert?" Lyanna asked, her eyes on the child. "King," Ned said. The word tasted of ash. "King at last." Lyanna closed her eyes, lashes black against her skin. "At last," she repeated. "He will come for me." "He will," Ned said, and heard his own voice as if through a wall. Robert Baratheon, with his laughing face and great hammer, with his oaths that came sure as sunrise. The boy from the Eyrie who had taught Ned to throw a punch and curse in 4 kingdoms. He would come like a storm across the King's Road. He would come with songs, with wine, with his heart held like a flag in a battlefield wind. He must never know. The words were very soft, but they did not shake. Lyanna turned her head and the loose braid dragged on the rough pillow. "Ned, he must never know." Ned looked upon the sleeping bundle. The child had a small red mouth and a fist no wider than the knot of Ned's thumb. He had hair dark as midnight and, when the eyes flickered open to slits, the gray of the wolf's wood. The Stark's eyes, their sister's eyes. He felt the past rise. The tourney at Harrenhal, the prince with his harp, the petals that fell from wreaths like snow. He had tried for years to hate a man he had never known, a ghost whose songs had outlived him. That hatred had kept him warm through rain and bitter damp and killing. It did not fit here. "I swore to him," Lyanna said, and her breath hitched. "I swore by hearth and heart. He would see the boy. He would name him. She shook her head, furious at her own weakness. "I asked him to keep me safe. He asked for truth. Ned, I cannot go back to Robert bearing another man's child and pretend the moon is anything but round. I cannot live a lie while a dead woman and 2 dead children lie colder than stone in their mother's bed." "Elia," Ned said, and the name was a knife. He thought of the Red Keep. He thought of a small body wrapped in a crimson cloak, of a boy dashed to ruin at the foot of a bed. He had not been there, but the story had ridden ahead of the men who sacked the city, and it clung yet to everything that breathed within its walls. Yes, Lyanna's gaze cut like ice. She was mother, was wife, and he was prince. He found a way to make a song that pleased his head and forgot the parts that mattered. "No one will sing me into righteousness. He is gone, and I am here, and the boy is here, and Robert is king. Keep him safe. Promise me." In another life there had been the stink of blood and a bed soaked through and the words pressed into his hands like a brand. In this life the brand was living, and the room smelled of roses and sweat and fear. Ned reached out. The child flailed and gripped his finger with a strength that surprised him. A wolf's clutch, stubborn as winter. "I promise," he said. "But Lyanna, promise me you will not be noble when you should be wise," she said. And for an instant the wild girl of the Winterfell yard looked out at him, the one who had ridden like the wind and laughed at boys who boasted. "Promise me you will do what is needed, not what will put a song in some fool's mouth." Howland Reed stood in the doorway then, small and damp-eyed, rag and blood on his hands. "Ser Arthur lives," he said, as if he did not quite believe the words. "We can move him if we build a litter."
Ned nodded.
He looked at Dawn. "We will carry his sword behind him," he said, though he did not know yet to where. Willa put the child in Lyanna's arms and rose to fetch more water. Lyanna gathered him against her with a serious wonder, as if each breath the babe took was a miracle she had dared not ask the gods for. "What will you name him?" Ned asked. Lyanna's smile was slow and small. "He will have a stark name to wear on his skin, whatever his blood says. Not a dragon's name." She touched the child's cheek. "John," she said finally. "After John Arryn. He kept you and Robert safe when you were boys. He taught you to be true when it cost you. That is the sort of name that keeps a man alive." Ned's throat was tight. "John," he repeated. The name settled like snow, quiet and present. They left at dusk, the tower blue in the last light, its broken mouth black as a wound. The dead went with them as far as a cairn could carry them. Stones piled high and cairns taller than a man. Their white cloaks folded beneath rock. Ned put Dawn wrapped in linen upon the litter behind Sir Arthur, and Gerald and Oswell rode upon the shoulders of nameless hill men until the bags of the mountain rivers washed the blood from their boots. The journey to Starfall was slow and careful. Sir Arthur drifted in and out of a fever dream, his eyes glassy, seeing things only he could see. Sometimes he spoke of water gardens and laughing girls with spears. Sometimes he cursed and tried to rise. Howland would lay a cool hand upon his shoulder and murmur a little reed-sung chant, and the great night would subside. Night fires painted their faces red. Lyanna fed her son with Willa's help, with patient hands, and when the babe slept she sat where she could look at the sky. The desert had more stars than the north, and sometimes the wind made a sound like far drums. At Starfall, Ashera Dane met them upon the pale stone steps. Her hair was a dark fall down her back, and her eyes a color that men would write verses for if they hoped to be forgiven. She looked at the litter and then at Lyanna and Ned, and there, upon that bright threshold, grief stood between them like a white tower no one could climb. "Arthur," she breathed. Her voice did not tremble. "Bring him in." They carried him to a room where the shutters stood folded like white wings, and the smell of lavender displaced the copper of traveling blood. The maester came. The maids came. Willa put down her basket and moved to help without being asked. Ashera did not cry. She dismissed the others with a single look until only Ned and Lyanna and the crannogman remained. "You killed him," she said to Ned very simply. Ned tried to speak. He found no words good enough not to be lies. "War killed him," Howland offered, but Ashera's mouth only curved. "I know what killed him," she said gently. She brushed her brother's hair back from his clammy forehead. "He chose it with both hands. He chose it when he chose their oaths in the Red Keep. He chose it when he turned his face from the sound of children crying. Do not tell me of war. Tell me what you want." "I brought his sword," Ned said, and the words felt meager. "It belongs here." Ashera's gaze went to the linen-wrapped bundle resting like a fallen moon upon a chair. "It belongs nowhere," she said, "but we will keep it and remember." She looked at Lyanna then. Here was a reckoning no steel could answer. The two women regarded each other, both too tired to pretend at other things. "I am sorry," Lyanna said. The words were raw. "I loved a prince who made foolish songs, and when the song ended, it kept playing inside my head, and I did not hear the screams until the doors had opened and it was too late." Ashera's mouth moved once more. "He loved you," she said, as if confessing to a priest. "He forgot how to love anything else." Lyanna's hands tightened on the child in her arms. "I did not," she said. They stood that way for a long moment. Then Ashera lifted her chin a fraction. "There is a wet nurse," she said. "Willa will see to the boy when you cannot." She looked at Ned. "Take him and your sister and your crannogman and leave this place before dawn. Dorne is full of men who will never forgive, and some of them have reason. The prince is dead, but what he did is not." "You have my gratitude," Ned said. "Gratitude is a light coin," Ashera replied. "Spend it quickly. It tarnishes if you keep it." She reached out and with one finger touched the downy black hair at Jon's crown. "He has a stark look." "He has a stark name," Lyanna said, and for the first time since the tower, the ghost of a grin. "At least the one the world will know." Ashera nodded once. "Go." When they left, the sea below Starfall lay as smooth as the side of a silver plate, and gulls wheeled like torn banners in the morning light. Howland steadied the small craft as they embarked, Lyanna holding Jon and Willa at her side. Ned looked back once and saw Ashera on the parapet, a single figure cut from shadow, and knew that some whisper about her and him would be born of this image, because men always preferred a romantic lie to a narrow, thorny truth. King's Landing smelled the way always it would. Like heat, like piss, like roses trying to be something they were not. The Red Keep bloomed upon its hill, beautiful from a distance and rubbing shoulders with brutality when one passed beneath its gates. They went in without Lyanna. She and the child and Willa rode north under guard with Howland Reed. A dozen silent men from the neck could vanish between reeds and grass like the memory of a scream in a loud hall. Ned went with 6, and the weight of his promise heavier than a hauberk. Robert met him in the throne room with a laugh that filled the trembling air like drums. He looked older already. Kingship had set upon him like a smith's hammer, banging him into a shape that might hold. The great crown was a circle of spoils from the men he had killed, twisted into gold by Tywin Lannister's smiths. Robert wore it as if it were only a joke he could not quite make. "Ned!" he roared, and took him in his arms and thumped his back until his bones rattled. "Gods, but you took your time. Have you been courting a Dornish girl? You were always slow at it." Ned stepped back. "I have been burying men," he said. Robert's grin faltered, then firmed, eager to believe in merriment again. Well, there will be enough time for mourning later. We have peace to drink to." His eyes slid toward the throne, and the laugh went out of him. "I have sat there and thought of you every hour. Have you seen it? Ugly damn thing." "I have seen worse," Ned said, and thought of a small bed with blue petals crushed into the sheets. Tywin Lannister stood at the edge of the dais like a tower of his own. He had studied the room and found a place where he might appear to be attendant yet tower over all. Ser Jaime Lannister lounged beside the throne, his gilded armor reflecting everything and nothing, his face as if carved by a man who loved good lines and mistrusted feeling. Varys drifted somewhere like a perfumed moth, and Littlefinger smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. Jon Arryn sat with weariness in his bones and relief in his eyes. Ned walked past them all and knelt before the man he called brother. He did it because the realm needed the show and because the child at his breast would need something crueler than stubborn pride to keep him breathing. When he rose, Tywin Lannister stepped forward and with ceremony laid 2 small bundles upon the floor. Ned's stomach turned. Even wrapped in crimson, the shapes could not lie about what they were. Robert's face went a color Ned had never seen on him. Tywin's voice was smooth and iron. "A gift, your grace, the last of your enemies." "Enemies?" Ned repeated, and savaged the word with his mouth. "Children. One whose skull had been crushed with a mail-clad fist. One who had known a knife too soon. Elia's children. Elia, who had been a wife in truth and had warmed her husband's bed and given him heirs because it was her duty and her desire." Robert looked from Tywin to Ned and back again. He lifted a hand as if he would touch the little shrouds, and then flung it away as if it burned him. "Damn you," he whispered. "Damn you all." Ned turned on his heel and went out. He walked the corridors until the stones cooled his feet through the soles of his boots and the rushes underfoot gave that sweet, molding smell. He found the hand in a cloistered courtyard where pigeons picked at crumbs and the sun made a promise it would never keep about mercies. "You should not have walked out," Jon Arryn said without any greeting. Ned leaned his back to the pillar and closed his eyes. "I should have drawn my sword and swung until I could not lift it," he said. "I should have thrown the bodies at their father's feet and said, 'Look what you have bought with your golden piece.' But I walked out. I have learned to do the thing that keeps a man breathing even if it cannot keep him right." "The realm needs peace," Jon Arryn said. It sounded as if he was trying to convince himself of something that had bled a long while. "What kind of peace?" Ned asked. "The kind that keeps boys from dying in the snow and girls from dying in childbed," Jon said, steady. "The kind that gives the years a chance to turn and show us their other faces. I do not forgive. I endure." Ned looked toward the distant hill where the sept raised its bells like supplicant hands. "Lyanna lives," he said into the breath between them. The hand's head turned sharply. He was an old falcon seeing the small dart of a hare. "Where?" "North," Ned said. "With a child." The older man drew air slowly as if it were a string. "Robert must not know," Ned said. "Not yet. Not until there is a world where knowing will not kill what must be kept alive." Jon Arryn's eyes moved over the trellis shadows quivering on stone. "You ask for a hard thing," he said. "A lie that will grow roots." "I do," Ned said. He did not bother with words about honor. He had been raised on them and he would die with them, but he had a living thing now in his hands that could not be fed such brittle bread. When he left the city the next day, Robert was drunk and laughing too loud, his arm around a Lannister girl whose name he had to ask each time he said it. Tywin watched, satisfied at an arithmetic sum that came out clean. Jaime watched, bored and burning. Varys watched, and somewhere in the walls a little spider tugged a silk filament and counted heartbeats. Winterfell received them in rain. The sky was a lid and water ran in sheets down the gray walls, silvering the stone. The yard mud sucked at hooves and boots. Hounds announced them, and then men, and then Catelyn. She stood just inside the gatehouse arch with her hair damp and her heart on her face where she could not help it. She had a bundle against her breast too. A wickering, red-faced Rob who was already impatient with the world. So there was something in her hands to hold when the look came into her eyes that had no good name.
Ned dismonted.
He went to her and kissed her wet forehead because a man is not just made of choices. He is also made of habits. She kissed him back with the dignity of a woman who has learned how to swallow pride and make it bread for her children. "This is my sister Lyanna," Ned said, when the men had made a half-circle of space. And to his credit, he did not hesitate before the word. "She is alive." No one had told Catelyn to expect this. No letter had carried such sweet news, too dangerous for paper and wax. For a heartbeat she looked as if she had been struck. Then she went to Lyanna and put out a hand that did not quite touch, as if she understood that to lay hands upon a miracle was to risk waking and finding herself alone. "You have your brother's eyes," Catelyn said. "You have my brother," Lyanna replied, and her smile was a thing with edges. "That should be enough." A faint laugh came from the doorway of the great hall, the old laugh that had once sent boys to steal apples and climb walls. Ben-Jen strode out, unshaven and wild with relief, and he lifted Lyanna up and turned her as if they were still children and the world had not tried to break their bones across its knee. When he set her down, his eyes found the infant in her arms. He looked at Ned without asking the question. Ned answered it with a look that said later and never and trust me all at once. The lie took shape that night in the solar with the door closed. The candle's tallow sent a faint greasy smell off into the beams. Lyanna sat with the child at her breast and looked neither at Ned nor at his lady wife. "Ned will claim him," Lyanna said. "You will hate him for it, Catelyn Tully of Riverrun, and I will deserve your hatred for asking. But if Robert sees my son, he will see Rhaegar, and Robert kills what he thinks is a dragon." Catelyn had been rice. Ed among singers and banners and a river that would not stop talking. She knew the sounds they made when they were lying and when they were telling truths that hurt. She looked at the babe and saw that black hair and that stubborn little mouth, that stark gray that could not be argued away, and there was a steel taste in her mouth. "You asked me to take a bastard into my hall," she said. Lyanna's chin came up. "I ask you to take my son." Something moved in Catelyn's face, a flicker like sun through beech leaves. She was not unkind. She was only a woman who loved her place and wished to keep it from shifting under her feet. She looked at Ned for help as if she hoped for a reprieve and feared one. "Catelyn," he said, "I ask it too." She exhaled, and Ned could see her measuring the cost out in little counters with careful fingers. In the end, the counters made a number that meant her children lived in peace, and she pushed them into the center of the table and let them go. "Then let it be done," she said softly. "But I will not pretend a smile I do not own." "I do not ask you to," Ned said. He would not lay that upon her too. It was a cruel mercy, and it cost all of them, each in their turn. They called the boy Jon Snow, and the first time the name was spoken in the yard, the ravens in the rookery fluttered and muttered as if they knew, as if names were a kind of weather that could be felt in bones hollow enough to tell a storm before it came. He grew with Rob, two small knots of energy tripping each other in the mud, their laughter brighter than any sun. Lyanna taught them to ride the way she had been taught and did not soften the lessons because they were boys and pretty. They both fell and bled, and both came back the next day. Catelyn watched from windows and doorways and clenched and unclenched her hands when Jon laughed, and in that laugh she heard a history she could not read. Ben-Jen watched too. One night he met Ned in the Godswood, where wind combed the leaves and the pool kept its secrets. "I am going to the wall," Ben-Jen said without the courtesy of prologue. Ned looked at his brother's face in the wet light. "Why?" Ben-Jen's smile was a slash. "Because I cannot live in a seat where every hall has a ghost for me and none of them will speak a word. Because there should be one Stark in black. Because there is a cold wind that whispers a thing I do not like and I can bear it there as well as anywhere. Because I am tired of being the extra chair at my lord brother's table." Ned reached out and gripped his forearm. "You are never extra." "I am not of the Hearthstone, no," Ben-Jen said and laid his hand over Ned's, rough palm to rough palm. "But I am of the wall. Say my name there and I will hear it in the stones." Lyanna did not argue with Ben-Jen when she heard. She kissed his cheek and said, "Send me word when the moon is sharp and the wind tastes like iron. I will know to bank the fires." He left in the morning under a sky that pretended at summer. Years turned. Greyjoy rose from the sea like a bad story told again, and Ned rode south with the banners of the north cracking at his back, and Robb toddled to the yard's edge and shouted, "Horse!" at men tall as pines, and Jon tried the word upon his tongue and made it new. Lyanna stood on the wall walk with the rain in her hair and gave orders to chain the gates and ration the barley and put away linen against blood. She sat nights with Catelyn before the fire while the house slept, and she did not speak until one night when wind from the west rattled the shutters. "You hate me less now," Lyanna said without bitterness. Catelyn's mouth twisted. "I have learned to hate other things more," she said. "War, the sound of ravens, the way children ask if their father will bring them something and mean only himself." Lyanna nodded. "He will come home," she said, with that simple, stark certainty that made men shake their heads and then follow as if their feet belonged to the words. When Robert came north at last, it was with a train that drank the wells dry from White Harbor to Winterfell. He had grown thick in the waist and set in the eyes, yet when he dismounted in the yard and lifted Ned from the ground with a hug that cracked ribs, he was again the boy who had sworn oaths on a hunting knife in the Eyrie.
Ned,
"Gods, look at you. And where is she? Where is my Lyanna?" He laughed as though it would conjure her. The laugh was not magic enough. She came down the steps that were slick with a morning wash of rain. The hall behind threw warmth against her back. She looked at Robert as if she were looking across a frozen lake at a boy waving his arms. He froze at the sight of her. For a moment all his hurts etched themselves upon him. Every hunger, every wound he had tried to fill with ale and victory. He took 3 steps and then stopped, as if a bridle had tightened on him. "Lya," he said. It was a name he had not permitted himself to say in years. His voice cracked clean in the middle. She did not run to him. She did not smile. She gave him her hand as a lady might, and when he bent to kiss it, he found it was scarred. And perhaps that surprised him more than anything else. The scars were fine white lines, the sort a sword hilt leaves on a palm when a girl learns where her grasp truly ends. "You are king," she said. "You are alive," he returned, and for that one heartbeat he was beautiful again. "If I had known, if you had known, you would have come with trumpets and wine," she said, a faint twitch of humor in her cheek. "And you would have trampled half the north with your joy." Robert said, and then swallowed. "Why did you not send for me?" "Because I did not wish to be carried like plunder into the city that wrapped a crimson cloak around dead babes," she did not say. "Because I have looked at myself in water and seen someone I could not bring to you and pretend was untouched by the tale I wrote. Because the boy at my breast would have died for your love." Instead she said, "Because Winterfell needed me." He laughed then, too loud and too obvious, and clapped Ned on the shoulder with the heavy affection that was sometimes a blow. "Are you hearing? Your sister has a sharper tongue than any woman south of the neck. Good. She will need it at court." "I am not coming south," Lyanna said. Robert blinked. "Not? Gods. Girl, do you think I came merely to look at your walls and your snow? You were promised to me and I to you. The world turned and stopped, and yet here we are. Come to King's Landing. We will be wed in the great September. The singers will choke to death on the sweetness of it." Ned felt Catelyn's hand go tight around his in the shadow of her skirts. In the yard, the stable boys had stilled, as if the horses themselves were listening. Jon and Robb stood behind a low wall, elbows planted on wet stone, eyes bright. "I will not wed you, Robert." Lyanna's voice did not rise, yet it filled the yard. The king's mouth opened, then shut. For an instant anger showed its yellow teeth. Then the pain came back and his voice found the smallest of words. "Why? Because there is blood on your crown that will not wash," she thought. "Because I loved a man whose promises were poems and I have learned not to be swayed by sound. Because I have a son whose life would be forfeit the first time a lord with golden hair decided to earn your favor. Because I am not a prize. Because I have buried too much of myself to be able to give you anything true," she said. "Because I do not love you." For a moment, Robert looked as if someone had driven a thin blade into his gut and twisted it slowly. Then he laughed again, because laughter was the only armor he had ever truly believed in. "You never did," he said. "That is the tragedy of me." His eyes flicked past her to the children. "Who are those wolves? The same age by the basket of them." "Mine," Ned said. He did not move his hand from Catelyn's. Robert grinned, too many teeth. "Both? Gods know you worked fast. Tully's stock is fruitful." He slapped Ned's back again and boomed at the sky as if it were all a jape. "Come, you sour dog. We will drink in your hall until the banners droop, and in the morning you will ride south and be my hand." Ned's mouth was an iron line. "I am no courtier. You are my friend," Robert said more simply, "and I trust you not to set the city on fire because you think it will warm a widow's hands." Lyanna met Ned's eyes then. Something passed between them as quick as a sparrow. He saw her shake her head. He saw her nod. He saw the fear in her that her boy would be noticed and the courage in her that he would be raised well even if it meant letting him stand one day upon a cliff with the sea moving like a living thing beneath. "I will come," Ned said, surprising himself a little. For a time, that night there were boar on the spit and men roaring with ale, and Robert's laughter was loud enough to crack slate. He asked for Lyanna to sit at his right hand, and she did, and they spoke of dogs and hunts they had known as children, and pretended they did not feel the past sitting between them like an uninvited guest. Catelyn sat straight-backed beside Ned and spoke to the Lannister queen, whose mouth smiled and whose eyes measured. Cersei asked the names of the boys with the interest of a cat staring at a birdcage. "Robb," Ned said, "and Jon." "A bastard," Cersei said, as if remarking upon the weather. "A boy," Lyanna said, and tilted her cup. "The world is crowded with men eager to tell him what else he is. I will let him be a boy first." Cersei's lashes lowered. How very northern. The Godswood was quieter. When the feast had grown thick and the king had found his way to some softer warmth in a chamber where no one would speak a hard truth, Lyanna went to the heart tree and sat with her back to the pale bark. Jon found her, small feet soundless on the wet grass. He looked at her the way he always did, unabashed and devoted, a small shadow who did not yet understand that light makes shadows at all. "Lya," he said, because that had been his first word and no amount of correction had quite scrubbed it out of him. He clambered into her lap and pressed cold hands into her warmth. She wrapped him in her cloak, the wolf's head upon the clasp, not so much looking as consenting. "You are to stay here," she told him, because children had to be told the same things a dozen times in a dozen ways. "When your father rides south, you will mind your lady mother." Her mouth quirked. She never said the word without thinking it was a poor substitute for the thing. "You will study with Maester Luwin. You will be kind to your brother and your sisters, and when you fall you will get up. Do you hear me?" Jon nodded with that excessive solemnity that was a small boy's imitation of a man's gravity. He traced the carving in the heart tree with a forgotten finger. "Will you go too?" "Not now," she said. "The South is full of people who talk as if words were food. I will not leave my wolves to go hungry." He looked upward, over her shoulder, at the pale leaves moving like breath. "Why does the tree have a face?" "To watch and listen," Lyanna said. "To remember. They remember even when we forget." "Remember what?" "That we belong to something that does not move when we do." She kissed the crown of his head. He smelled of rain and grass and boy. "Even when we lose ourselves, we are not lost." When the hand's banner broke upon the wind, Winterfell's yard chimed with harness and the steam off the horses lifted like breath from mouths open for prayer. Ned kissed Catelyn and whispered something into Sansa's bright hair and into Arya's tangled mess. He did not kiss Jon because men were watching, but he held the boy's shoulder long enough that an impression of fingers would linger. To the south, the road went down through country that smelled less of pine and more of people with each mile. They moved with the king's train until the split at the Trident where roads part like rivers. Along the march, Ned watched his sister. She had the look she wore when storms gathered, watchful, a line between her brows as if thought had become a coin too heavy for her pocket. At King's Landing, all was motion and menace dressed up as pageantry. Jon Arryn stood with a ledger and a sword at his belt and a cough he could not or would not put down. He smiled for Lyanna the way men smile when they see something they had once believed in, made flesh again, and then the days fell into one another like coins tumbling loose. Took little time, which was everything, for Lyanna to learn the new game. She knew when to sit near Barristan Selmy and ask him about a tourney in which he had broken 3 lances and a prince's pride. She knew when to compliment Stannis Baratheon's honesty in such a way that the man looked startled and uncertain whether he had been praised or warned. Varys came to her chambers with a flagon of sweet wine, his hands fluttering. "The realm rejoices in your return, my lady," he said, every syllable so careful that one might cut with its edges. Lyanna smiled and spoke of how very fine the repairs to the city's drains had been under his diligent oversight, and the eunuch left with the faintest crease between his brows. Cersei came with 2 ladies and a smile like a needle. "You must forgive us that your rooms are small," she said. "The Red Keep was not built for comfort. It was built so the king might always be reminded of the cost of being king." "And the cost of living near him," Lyanna said pleasantly. "We will economize." One night, when the moon was a bitten coin and the harbor sang its old lullaby of ropes and clever thieves, Lyanna found Ned in the Hand's Solar with a look on his face that she had seen once when he had found a broken wing in the snow and turned it in his hands knowing he could not mend what mattered. On the table lay a paper in the crabbed hand of a careful, frightened man. "From Jon Arryn?" she asked. "He found something." "He found the color of hair," Ned said bleakly. "Black of Baratheon, gold of everything else." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if the world were different. "Robert's heirs." Lyanna stood very still. The wind outside coaxed the drapes and made them into long white fish swimming in an invisible river. "If you show him this," she said, "Cersei will kill you." "She might," Ned said almost absently. "And if you do not," Lyanna continued, "the realm will tear itself into pieces anyway, but perhaps it will be the sort of tearing that gives you time to pull our wolves clear." Ned looked up sharply. "You ask me to be a coward, sister? I ask you to be what you promised," she said. "Wise when noble would get you killed. Do not show Cersei the knife you bring to her throat. Show Stannis. He is law from skull to soul. He will not flatter himself with danger. He will go to Dragonstone and gather such men as love the letter of things, and when the king dies, and he will, Ned. He is a man who runs toward boars with a skin full of wine. There will be one place to set our feet that is not made of lies. We cannot make a good world. We can make one less quick to murder boys. For a time, it was almost possible. Ned spoke to Stannis in words that were rocks, and Stannis stacked them into a low wall and went to Dragonstone at dawn without even the decency to give his brother warning. The city sulked and murmured. Jon Arryn went to his bed with a draught of milk of the poppy and did not stir again. Men whispered he had choked on a bit of something. Men always whispered. Robert hunted and laughed and let Lancel Lannister fill his cup and his head with a boldness that was not his own. Lyanna went to the king's pavilion the night before the hunt and found him alone, looking at the antlers nailed up like trophies of failed gods. He turned with that huge smile that was all innocence. "Lya," he said, "you came to wish me luck." "I came to ask you to wear a shirt of mail," she answered. She had never learned to come at things sideways. "You are not a boy anymore. Even boys learn to bring a spear to a boar." He laughed, indulgent. "We hunted in the Vale, you and I. I learned to ride while you showed off," she said. "Listen, wear the mail." He lifted a hand as if to touch her face, then dropped it. "Always you were the wiser of us," he said. "A shirt of mail, then. For the Lady of Winter." He lied. He did not wear it. He bled his life out into a puddle of leaves that had once been green. He died with Ned's name and hers tangled in his mouth, and with Lancel's guilt standing pale as milk by the tent flap, and with Cersei already weaving a net of silk and steel in chambers that smelled of power and old wine. Afterward, Ned did not confront the queen with anything except his silence. He took the king's last paper and laid it like a sad dish before the small council and said that this named him regent until the true heir should be found. Cersei tore it with a delicacy that was obscene. The gold cloaks rushed. The blades came out like tongues. But Lyanna had not idled her hours. There were men in the city who owed Howland Reed favors no one else remembered, and there were still those who heard the name Stark and loosened something in their chests. Varys, who loved the realm the way a man might love a delicate bird he had never touched with his hands, found it in his interest to let doors open where they should not have. They did not win the city. They merely left it alive. They went to sea under a moon that had seen too much. Sansa wept for a knight who had promised her songs and given her a bruise of the heart instead. Arya wept for nothing, her face a hard little mask that broke only when she slept. Ned wept in the night where he thought no one could hear. Lyanna did not weep. She had learned both when and how. On Dragonstone, Stannis received them with the courtesy of a man who has never learned to inlay cruelty with charm. He looked at the paper and then at the girls and then at Lyanna. "You will swear?" he asked. "I will swear to the law," Ned said. "I will swear to the North," Lyanna said. "That is not the same thing," Stannis observed. "It is for me," Lyanna replied, and did not bother to explain the arithmetic by which she had come to that sum. War came anyway. Renly put on a crown that looked better on him than truth. Lannister banners blazed out of the west. The Riverlands burned and boys made kings out of grief. But Winterfell remembered how to keep a thing warm through a long night. Catelyn held the hall with Luwin's soft voice at her ear and Roderick Castle's rasp behind. Lyanna returned north by road prickling with danger and rode through quiet villages where women looked at her and saw a thing that had not bent. She found Jon practicing with a wooden sword and told him to stop thinking about glory and learn how not to die. He looked up, and in his eyes was a grief she had not given him. It was merely his, something planted there by the world. "Will father come back?" he asked. "He will," she said. "He was wise enough to flee once. He will be wise enough again." "You told me not to hope with my mouth," Jon said solemnly. "Hope with your hands, then," Lyanna said. "Make them ready." When Ned came, it was by Raven first. "I live," the message said in a hand that had learned to write slowly so as not to lie. He came by horse months later, thinner, his face cut by new lines, his girls taller and changed in ways a father sees first when no one is watching. He held them as if the wind might lift them. He held Jon and did not let go at once, and Catelyn did not look away but neither did she look long. The war unspooled itself into years, into names and places that would someday be sewn into tapestries and hung in halls where the children would point at the bright figures and guess at the sounds they had made. There were defeats to be borne and alliances that felt like swallowing flint. Lyanna went sometimes to the words of the old gods and sometimes to the iron that men liked better. There were nights when Sansa's songs faltered and Arya's eyes grew tired and Robb looked at maps as if maps could be reasoned with and Jon held a bow in hands that had grown sure. Benjen sent ravens with news in few words and once a small gift, a bit of obsidian in leather. "Keep this," the scrap said. "Cuts more than skin." In the gods' wood it was winter even when it was not. Snow lay sometimes like a gentle hand upon the world. Jon came there often, because a boy raised among wolves learns to speak most easily where words have sap under them. One night he found Lyanna at the pool, looking at her face in the black water. She did not turn when he came. He stood with his hands in his belt and said nothing, which was the starkest thing he could do. "You are near a man," she said at last. He huffed a laugh. "So Robb tells me. He calls me slow." "Robb is impatient," Lyanna said. "Robb thinks life is a fight he can win if he keeps his arms moving. You are slower because you listen. When the gods talk like the wind does, that is not foolishness." He scuffed the snow with a boot and said what had lived under his tongue for some time. "Who was my mother?" Lyanna's hands on the cloak's edge went still. The weirwood face looked at them with its blind red eyes and maybe it listened. Maybe it only remembered. "A girl who loved badly," she said. He breathed. It left him in a shape that told her he had known for a long time and had not let himself think it out. "Am I?" "You are a Stark," she said immediately. "You are mine." His mouth trembled. "Yours. I made your bones," she said, voice very low, as if the trees themselves must not catch it. "I fed you my blood and I carried you like a secret through a world that would have killed you to keep itself tidy. The other blood in you is only the half that showed me how dangerous promises can be. I will tell you the name one day, but not now because there is no profit in it. Know only that you wear wolf eyes for a reason. Know that it is a hard, good thing." He looked at the water. It did not move, but it did not freeze either. "Does father?" "Does Lord Stark know?" "He knows everything about you that matters," she said, and that was true in a way that made her want to weep. He nodded slowly. "I will be your son," he said, as if he were taking an oath. "You already are," she answered. "Now go and beat Robb with a sword. It will do him good." He laughed, and in the sound she heard her own youth, somehow not dead. When he left, she looked again at the water. The face there belonged to a woman who had not married a king and had not died in a tower, but who had learned the price of both. She thought of Robert, dead under a red sky, of a prince who had sung, of a man in black upon a wall of ice. The world was smaller and larger both than the song had said. News came that Stannis had taken King's Landing with a careful hand, and the sort of siege that makes men respect a thing they hate. Cersei fled west. Renly died one morning in a tent without a mark upon him. Some men said the gods had reached in and pinched his light out like a candle. Others whispered about shadows. None of it mattered to the north immediately. The Lannisters roared. The rivers ran red. But the winds still came down from the shivering sea, and the snows laid themselves over the barrows. Winterfell stayed as it has always stayed, a gray rock against whatever the world decided to bring. In the deep of winter, when the sky lay low and wolves sang at the edge of the world, Lyanna woke to the sound of the keep breathing and knew that something very old had turned its head. She rose and dressed in the dark and went to the wall walk. The air was a clean blade against her teeth. The moon oiled everything with a small, mean light. On the yard, Jon stood alone, his breath smoking. He had a sword in his hand, not the wooden kind. It glinted, not showy. Honest steel, well cared for. He moved through a pattern Catelyn had once called ugly and Ned had called useful. The boy's feet knew the earth. He finished and lowered the sword, and for a moment stood listening to the cold. "You are quiet," Lyanna said. He did not start. He had learned to hear. "You are quieter," he said, and came to her with his breath still running hard. "There is something wrong." "There is always something wrong," Lyanna said, which was not a comfort and not meant to be one. "But there is also this. We have bread. We have fire. We have names and the right to keep them." Jon nodded and turned his head as if to find some sound at the edge of hearing. A raven perhaps, or the distant crack of a river's ice skin giving way in spring. "I feel as if I am going to be asked to do something I do not want," he said. "You are a Stark," she answered. "We do what is asked, and sometimes we do what is needed even when no one is asking. When you are asked, tell me. I will tell you how to say yes and keep yourself." He smiled crookedly. "Is that possible?" "It is," she said, "but it hurts a little." He inclined his head, the movement small and formal, and left to his bed. Lyanna stood a while longer and let the cold comb through her hair. When she went back inside, she paused at the sleeping chambers where her brother lay. Ned was turned toward Catelyn. In sleep, he had the look of the boy who had come south with nothing but his honor and a great longing. And she loved him fiercely in that moment for all the ways in which he had not broken. In the years that followed, boys became men and girls women, and some of them bent and did not break, and some broke and made something of the pieces. Lyanna walked the walls in summer and in winter and taught the children how to fall and how to get up. She sat sometimes beneath the heart tree and tried to hear what the old gods said when they were very quiet. Jon grew, and people who had once said bastard as if it were a stain learned to say it as if it were a fact that did not change the price of barley. He took vows one day before the tree, not those of black but those he made himself, to guard what he loved, to be slow to anger and quick to rise, to listen when the wind told him something he did not know. There would be more wars. There would be cold in shapes that men had forgotten, and fires that came from old songs that should never have been sung. There would be choices that could not be unmade. But for a long while, in a castle in the north, winter roses grew in a small stony corner of the godswood. They did not bloom every year. When they did, their scent was sharp as the sound of a promise said once and held forever. And when Jon passed that way, he would pause and close his eyes, and he would not be a bastard then, or a prince, or the answer to some riddle men had set before he was born. He would be a boy from Winterfell, with the lap of cold water at his boots and the whisper of leaves above, with a mother who had not left him and an uncle who had lied for love, and he would open his hands and let the world be as it was for one small, honest breath.